Let's bring in from Encima Global, David Malpass. It's good to have you here. We get so much to talk about. I want to bring up your note right away. We expect a letdown in U.S. GDP growth. Ultra-loose fiscal and monetary policy is creating lasting inflation and debt problems. They don't provide sustained growth. What does provide sustained growth?
Hi, Tom. Well, private sector jobs, obviously, and that's not really what the U.S. is about. We keep pumping up Washington, D.C., ever bigger government. And so we've got to really have a change of culture and mindset to where smaller businesses can create jobs. Right now, the banks, we're running this very weird monetary policy with 0% Fed funds rate while the economy is growing pretty fast. It doesn't make any sense.
Let me do a rewind here, Dave. We're going to get your mic worked out here. Earlier this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance, I spoke with Sophia Drosas of Morgan Stanley. We discussed investors' concerns in the current economy and how oil prices are affecting Fed policies.
Investors are concerned just because oil prices in the three-digit range start to make people a little bit worried. They start to think about where could oil prices go. We are beginning to see more divergence in economic policy, and it's really the oil prices that are bringing that to the forefront.
And you see oil prices here. We're going to take that mic. That's a backup mic, David. We'll see if we can get your mic to work here. It's good. It's pink shirt day here, so you get to hold a mic. Let's see how this works. Bring up this chart here of the dollar, because this is something you've been dead on. I get a tear, folks, when I see this. A Japanese reflation. This is a chart from my book, Flying on One Engine, from 2005 or so, and that chart was way down there in the lower right. And David Malpass, you were dead on about gold and yen. You hit the ball out of the park on this. Full disclosure, Red Sox media book out today. That's a good thing. Why is gold at $14.40 in U.S. dollars?
Yeah. People are worried about the Fed. So we've got, again, the odd situation of a 0% Fed funds rate and the Fed actually buying up the government debt. This is unparalleled. You know, it's not a normal monetary policy. The Fed's trying to make it sound like this is just routine. Nobody in the world buys that. And so they're getting out of the dollar.
I mean, I've seen you at the Economic Club in New York, and it's like a lot of muckety-mucks around, and you're there asking questions of Ben Bernanke or whatever. The whole thing is about institutional control. My viewers say, wait a minute, gold's at $14.40. What's that about? Who's getting this right? Bernanke posing, asking important questions, maintaining rhetorical control, or does the American public get it when they say, wait a minute, gold's at $14.40?
I think the public gets it, and they can now buy ETFs, which is a worrisome trend. You've got normal people who would rather put their money in gold than in their own small business, and that's just hurting jobs. That's what has to change. I think in order to get jobs going in the U.S., you've got to bring capital back to the country. Right now, the capital is going to Asia. So we have a giant Asia stimulus program going on out of Washington, D.C. It's a combination of an ultra-loose monetary and an ultra-loose fiscal policy. And the market response, the average person even in the U.S. knows that they should go buy Asia under that kind of a policy.
Under that policy, and I think of Alberto Alessine at Harvard talking about a need for political courage, then do you agree with what we've seen in the United Kingdom, what we've heard from Axel Weber with headlines out here recently? Is that what we need in the U.S., or are we a right to be more malleable, more adjustable, more accommodative?
Well, now, I do think if the federal government reduced spending, we would get more jobs. So I disagree with the pure Keynesian approach. Some people are saying, and it's usually people inside the Beltway, are saying if Washington would only spend more money, we'd get more jobs. You saw Bernanke even yesterday saying that he would like to have a looser monetary policy given the high unemployment rate. And neither of those make sense. Neither loose fiscal nor loose monetary is going to bring capital back to the U.S.
Ron Paul, chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, a little bit of a storm today. Michael McKee was talking about he wants to go back to the gold standard. You look at gold as a negative, a gold surge, I would say, is a negative. How do you respond to Chairman Paul's comments?
Remember, Paul Volcker said gold is the enemy of this good central banking. If gold is going up, the central banker is doing a bad job. That's the way I read it. So I don't want to see another gold standard. I would like to see the Fed looking at gold and saying it should be stable over a long period of time. 50 years from now or 100 years from now, do you think gold's going to be $1,000 an ounce or $5,000 an ounce. That makes a huge difference in how you invest, in whether you want to create jobs in the U.S. or create jobs in China. U.S. corporations are deciding every day whether to put the jobs in Asia or in the U.S., and they're choosing Asia.
I don't know if you've had time to see Bill Gross's op-ed today, but it was very Malpassian. That's like Keynesian, but it's Malpassian. Here it is. Here's a segment of it. See this, folks, at PIMCO. 2 bits, 4 bits. It's the note of the day. 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits a dollar. Bond yields and stock prices are resting on an artificial foundation of QE2 credit that may or may not lead to a successful private market handoff. That's a key phrase. Private market handoff and stability in the markets. Can we get that private market handoff? That's the bet of Bill Dudley, isn't it?
The Fed is saying, oh, this will work out smoothly because we can just pay people to keep their money at the Fed, and so there's no real exit problem. The challenge that I have with that is you end up with the U.S. Federal Reserve pretty much alone in the world, maybe only with the Bank of Japan, holding this giant amount of overhang over the markets.
Why?
Why do they?
How do we get ourselves in this position with the Japanese versus X number of other central banks?
I think the Fed is overreaching on its role. The Fed has decided that it is its job to create growth. And that's dangerous for a future precedent. Think 20 years from now, if we have a slowdown, the president's going to look at the Fed and say, go buy some bonds.
Let me defend Chairman Bernanke and the institution. They're overreaching because others were underreaching.
That's no excuse. You can't substitute one role. So you're right that you could look at the federal government and say this stimulus package doesn't work. It's the wrong thing. We should be cutting the federal spending. And Bernanke has said that. But then that doesn't give justification for the Fed to step in and fill that vacuum.
David Malpass with us with Encima Global. Bring it up right away, folks. Chart 4. This is the one that causes gray hair on Mr. Malpass. Tax receipts. I did this per capita, David. I just took the population. The chart looks the same. Up, down. How can we run a budget as we've run for years when we're down like that? I mean, just intuitively, something's got to give.
That's right. We've got a huge pro-cyclical fiscal policy, meaning when the economy does badly, the budget deficit explodes. Part of it is receipts go down, part of it is spending goes up. I think from the standpoint of markets, the structural reforms become very important. What's the budget deficit going to look like 5 years from now? And the concern, obviously, is it's going to look almost as bad as it does right now.
You worked on Capitol Hill. You got that nice mix of economics to politics, including doing the Scott Brown Redux in a van going around New York trying to get nominated with the Republicans. Fine. David Primo of the University of Rochester suggests a constitutional amendment to bring in budget responsibility. Is that too narrow a task of our Constitution?
No. I think the Constitution does have a bit of a vacuum or a missing spot.
A fiscal vacuum.
A fiscal vacuum.
Break exclusive. Malpass Keene. We've just invented that. It's a fiscal vacuum. Go.
Here's why. The Constitution was clear on powers that the federal government has, and it said it has the power to borrow. And in many cases, it put limits on those powers. But in the case of borrowing, it didn't put any limits at all. And so state by state around the country, all of the states have, or almost 49 of them have, a balanced budget requirement. The federal government does not. And I think that's a missing part of the Constitution. They could handle it, in my view, statutorily, meaning if Congress would simply pass a law and the president sign it that limits the debt to GDP ratio, investors globally would flock into the United States. They'd say, wow, that country is actually changing.
Is there a manufacturing renaissance going on, or is it just weak dollar?
There's a combination. The dollar weakness does give concentrated benefits to a few people at the cost of everybody else in the country. But then also there, on the auto side, people stopped buying cars in 2009, and so we're getting some pent-up demand. It's a legitimate rebound in auto production.
Well, when you look at all this, David, and you know it's March already. Where did the first 2 months of 2011 go?
Fast.
Just this cacophony that I see in viewer mail and on Facebook and on Twitter, this great uncertainty as we go to this jobs day. Bring up again elegant chart 1, if you would. I want you to bring this up. This is the ISM. This is the disparity. We showed this, David, with Maury Harris. ISM survey. You can see it down here, David. Don't break your neck. The white line is the ISM manufacturing recovering, and the yellow line new home sales. Have you ever seen it this apart?
And it shouldn't be this far apart. There should be some correlation. Here's what's happening, though. The housing sector is still just being decimated, I think, by Washington policy. They've had how many different mortgage programs, each one almost as bad as the previous one, and they simply are not working to bring the principal value of mortgages down to the value of the house. And so in New York State, for example, we're seeing people move out of the state, move into Pennsylvania, because in Pennsylvania the houses are doing better than in New York State. And it's a giant problem that I think has to be fixed out of Washington, D.C. with a better mortgage program.
How do you do that better mortgage program?
They've got to set up a system. So Lou Ranieri's been on with you. He's got a company that buys the mortgage from the bank and sells it back to the homeowner so they get a fair deal. There needs to be a facilitation.
Who gets the haircut there? Who takes the haircut?
Both sides. So the bank gets less, gets some write down, but the homeowner is paying more than the market would. The homeowner knows better than anybody else what his house is worth and what kind of a mortgage he can pay. Give him the chance to have a fair principal value, and that's going to work for the middle class.
Great. We got to leave it there. David Malpass, never enough time. Encima Global.